the E75 system. We looked at the indicators, and we looked at how to set them up on your charts, and we also looked at the basics of trend lines and how they apply to the system. So let me just quickly recap for you. And we talked about the 200 period Bollinger Band, the 100 period Bollinger Band. Remember, it's 200 and the setting is 2 standard deviations, and this one here is the 100 Bollinger Band with 2 standard deviations. And down here at the bottom of the screen, which is slightly obscured by this thing here, which I can't seem to get rid of, we've got the stochastic, and we said the settings are 14, 7, 3, and if you're using MetaTrader, that should be 14, 3, 7. The objective is to get the lines nice and smooth and close together like they are here. So once you've got all your charts set up, you're ready to rock and roll, and we're then looking at trend lines. And in fact, right in front of me I've got a great example. It's the euro on the 5-minute chart, and once again you can see this shaded area is when I start trading, and this is 5 AM CET, but generally I only get to the charts a little later, but that's when I start monitoring the signals. Now on this particular day you can see I could draw 2 trend lines, one there, alright, connecting that area, that's the start, that's the second place, that's the third touch, but then I could also have drawn one there, and I'm actually trading this live while I'm talking, so it's a very good example. This trend line, this steep shorter term trend line starts at around 345 and ends at around 5:30. So this one isn't quite 3 hours long. In fact, it's only about 2 hours long, but it's nice and smooth. You can see there's one touch, that's the start, second, third, and the fourth touch up there, and that's where it broke down. Now we got 2 good entry signals here. If you missed the first one because either it wasn't 3 hours long or it was and you weren't at the screen, there was a good entry here, which I actually took at 1.2985 and short, and you can see we got down to about 35 or 40, so that was about a 40 pip move. But the second opportunity was here, and you can see there's the first touch, second touch, third touch, and we broke down beautifully through this trend line, and we also moved about I don't know, 40 pips on that trade. So what I want to do today is to get into the nuts and bolts of how the system works, and I'm going to try and go through the process, and this is not going to be as easy as it is to do some of the other videos, so I want you to bear with me. And the best way to do this is to go through examples and start setting up the parameters of the trading system. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So in this video, what I'm going to be talking about is the entry conditions and the stop losses on the trade, and really just talking about how we get a signal, how we enter the trade. In the subsequent videos, I'm going to be talking about monitoring the trade and all the other parts of all the other aspects of the system. Now, while we're watching this one, you can see this is in fact a very good trade, and depending on our exit target, we would still be in this trade, but we'll talk about exit targets and that sort of thing later on, and I expect this will probably move down quite nicely down towards this lower Bollinger Band, which is a very long way away. So what we're going to be talking about right now is entry conditions and taking the trade. Alright, so let me just get rid of these lines here, and so what we're looking for the entry conditions is really 3 things to take place, and each one of those 3 things can be broken down. So I'm going to try and go through each one with you right now, and I'm going to actually write them on the screen. So let's get a new piece of paper here. And I'm just going to actually move this along, in fact, so that we've got some blank space. Alright. So, entry conditions. The first one is that we have, and I'm going to talk about, let's talk about short trades for now. And then we'll go on to long trades, which is really just the opposite. So we're talking about short trades. Okay, so entry condition number one is that we have an overbought stochastic. That's entry condition number one. We want the stochastic to be overbought. And we're going to be looking at each one of these shortly. Entry condition number two, we want the price to touch or pierce the top 200 or 100 Bollinger. So it could touch the top 100 or the 200 Bollinger Band. It doesn't really matter, but ideally we want the price through or touching or through both Bollinger Bands. Okay, so it could be just touching one or the other, but ideally we want the price to be touching both Bollinger Bands. And when I say touching, it could just be touching, or the price could be through, right through, and continuing higher through the two Bollinger Bands. And the third condition is we want a valid trend line to have formed. This is the entry condition, remember, entry condition. I'm not talking about the actual entry itself. So we're looking for the conditions, in other words, the setup before the trade can be considered. For a short trade, we want an overbought stochastic. We want the price touching or piercing or going through either the top 100 or the top 200 Bollinger Band, but ideally both Bollinger Bands. And the third condition is we want a valid trend line. Okay, a valid trend line. Now, let's recap on what a valid trend line is. So I'm going to just get rid of this and then clear the screen. So what is a valid trend line? Now, you can remember this from yesterday probably. First of all, ideally it should be 3 hours long or greater. Second, we need 3 touches or more. And third, we're looking for a smooth, in inverted commas, trend line. Okay, so I want you to remember that the conditions for entry are a valid trend line. Let's start from here. Alright, with those 3 conditions, 3 hours long or greater, 3 touches of the trend line or greater, and we're looking for a smooth trend line. So that's major condition number 1. Condition number 2, we want stochastic overbought. In other words, greater than 80. It doesn't have to be turning down or coming back beneath the 80 level or anything like that. It's just got to be above 80. And that's approximate. I don't look for, there's no magic figure in 80 or 79 or 85. But when it gets to that zone, the 80 zone, it means that it's overbought. And so if it reaches 79 or 75, in certain conditions, if everything else is right, I'll consider it as a trade. And then the third condition, of course, is that the price is touching or through the 100 or 200 Bollinger, and ideally both. Okay, so excuse me, those are the setup conditions for a trade, and I suggest you, if you can read my writing, of course, this will be in the transcript, but I suggest you pause the video and write this down. The setup is a valid trend line, which means it's 3 hours longer, 3 hours long or greater, 3 touches or more, and smooth, and I'll be defining that again during this video. We want the stochastic to be overbought, in other words greater than 80 or thereabouts, and we want the price touching, or in other words piercing or through the 100 or the 200 Bollinger Band, and ideally both. That's the trade setup. Alright, so you may pause the video and write those down, because this is pretty important. What we're going to be talking about next is the trade entry itself. So I'm going to have a look at a few setups first of all before we go on to the trade entry. So let's go and have a look at some of those now. Alright, so let's pull this back. Sorry about the fiddling around here, but I've got to move the writing pad out of the way. Alright, so here we have, let's go back a few days, and I'm going to go back to the beginning of this week, the 19th. Let's just check the date. I think that's Monday, that's correct. Yep, 17th, 19th. Here's Monday, the 19th of January 2009, and I'm looking for setups on the euro, US dollar, and this is the trading start of the trading day at 5 a.m. This is the time when I start to look at things, and what I can do is compress the chart a little bit and start to look for setups. Now, the first thing you'll see, the first thing I look at is I go back and just have a look at what's happened over the last session. Really, this is the Asian session, or mostly it's the sort of lead up of New York into Asia, and I try and draw some longer term trend lines, and you can see there's a pretty nice one there. There's a first touch, second touch, third touch. We had a look at this one yesterday, and so I draw the longer term trend line, but I'm not really looking for that time period. This is about 12 hours or so, and then I have a look at the shorter term. Whoops, I've got to go back there now. I have a look at the shorter term trend line, and I see if there's anything really that's taken place in the last 3 to 10 hours. Now, first thing you can see here is that we do have a setup over here. We've touched now this grey line here is the 100 period Bollinger Band, and the green line is the 200. Perhaps I should just change the 200 to, let's say, bright red. Okay, that's better. So there's the 200, the red one. There's the 100, and let's see if we've got the entry conditions once we've touched the Bollinger Band. So you just really need to look for one of the conditions first. You can either look at the stochastic and just scan along and see where the stochastic becomes overbought. Remember, we're looking at short trades now. Or you can look at when the price hits the Bollinger Band. But remember, we've got to have both of those conditions in place. In this case here, we've hit the Bollinger Band, we've got an overbought stochastic, we've got this longer term trend line, but the one we're really interested in is the 3 hour plus trend line, and we have it there. So I'm going to actually delete this longer term trend line, and so you can see we've got a 3 hour move. I think that's 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. We've got 3 touches, and then we've got a break beneath. Now that's the entry signal. I'm going to talk about stop losses and so on and so on, and the actual trade itself just now, but that's the setup right there. Okay, so on Monday this week we had a 3 hour trend line. We touched the top Bollinger Band. In fact, and again, if you understand candle patterns, there's a nice piercing pattern there. Sorry, dark cloud cover pattern, that 2 candle pattern, and often this actually helps you apply the system, although it's not necessary. And that 2 candle setup right there is called a dark cloud cover, and I'm not going to go into that right now, but you can go and do some research on your candles. And overbought stochastic touching the top Bollinger Band, a nice smooth trend line, and we have the entry conditions. And if we go to the hard right edge and put it like that, you can see we've got the entry conditions for a trade right there. Alright, so let's go on a little bit further. And there we have the stochastic oversold, but we haven't touched the Bollinger Band at the bottom. Okay, here's a trend line going down, but it goes from 8 AM to 9:30, so it's not long enough. So what I can now draw is the trend line going from here. That was the short-term trend line I was talking about, which is not long enough, so I can now draw one from here. Alright, so I'm now just widening out the trend line a little bit, but you see we don't have an oversold stochastic, and in fact the price continues to go down. So now I can widen out the trend line just a little bit more, so it incorporates these 3 points and that top point. And now I'm looking to see the price is now running along the Bollinger Bands, and that's often what happens once you get into a strong trend. The price will run along, just touching and tagging the Bollinger Band. Now remember, this system works the best in ranging markets, and I said yesterday that the markets range about 75% of the time. And at the time of making this video, we've had very, very strong trending markets. And we've had some of the largest moves, the most volatility, the biggest trends that we've seen in the last 20 years. The euro's been in its largest downtrend ever, and the pound as well, certainly in the last 20 years. So we're seeing very much a trending market right now, but you'll see that the system works nevertheless. And there was a good trade entry there. You saw that one worked out. And now we're looking for long entries off the bottom. We're looking for the stochastic to become oversold, and for the price to touch the Bollinger Bands, which is doing all the way down. But in this case, we reached the end of the day. I normally stop trading 2 or 3 hours before the end of this period. And again, in later videos, we're going to talk about trading times and when you should stop trading for the day, when you should look for the very last trade of the day, and so on. So there's a trend line, and really it just carries on. And I'm just really going to be looking at trend lines in our session, although we can have a look in the Asian session as well. Once we're into a new session, I basically remove the old trend line, and we can start drawing another one down here. I hope I'm not going too fast, and that's what the benefit of the webinars that will follow these videos, and that'll take place during this mentorship process, and also the questions that come in by email. And in the webinars, I'll be able to answer questions by inserting more videos. So that's the reason why I'm staggering the release of the videos. Alright, so here's the Asian session, and you can see we've now got a trend line moving down, and from 2100 to midnight, so that's 3 hours or so. It's a bit longer than 3 hours, and we have an oversold stochastic. We're touching the Bollinger Band, and we get a break higher. Even though it doesn't go too high, it only goes about 25 pips, there's still a valid entry signal there. Let's go and have a look at the next day. So here we are into the next session, and once again now I'm looking for touches of the Bollinger Band, I'm looking for oversold stochastic, I'm looking for a trend line down, and let's have a look to see if we can entry condition here. We've got a very wide trend line coming out here, and we go through most of the day with a hell of a messy, choppy type of setup. Remember, we need a smooth trend line. There's certainly no smooth trend line activity during that day. And we're now into the Asian session. We can redraw new trend lines. We can actually draw a longer term trend line down like this. It's got 3 touches, and then so there's the first touch, second touch, third touch. Again, it's not a particularly smooth trend line, but in fact it's not a very smooth one at all, and it lasts for quite a long time. But once again, we get an oversold stochastic touching through the Bollinger Bands, and then a break higher. I'm going to be talking about stop losses and so on and so forth. and all that sort of thing. And now we get to where we are today with probably the best example, which is very fortunate. And I can just reset that. Here's the start of today. Okay. Here's the start of today, and remember we had this very neat trend line coming up from there to there. That was the slightly wider angled one, or the flatter one, and then we had this nice sharp one moving up from there to there. And you can see whether we entered over there or over here, we've had a nice move on our hands. In fact, already about 60 pips, and that 60 pip trade has taken place in, well, only about half an hour, so a pretty nice move. So there was the entry setup, overbought stochastic. That was the first trade. I'm also going to be talking about stochastic divergence, which makes things a little bit more complicated, but there was a second entry there through the Bollinger Band, nice reversal candle, breakdown below the trend line. So what I'm trying to do is point out entry setups here, and not the trade itself. So there was a setup there, there was a setup there, and simply based on the conditions of a trend line, 3 hours or longer, and with the 3 sub-conditions to that. Remember, trend line's got to be smooth, it's got to be 3 hours or longer, it's got to be have the 3 touches. Then we want an overbought or oversold stochastic, and we want the price to be piercing the Bollinger Bands. Now I'm going to go back on the euro to the beginning of the month, and I'm going to point out some entry setups. Now I want you to be aware that no trading system gives 100% accuracy, and if you can achieve about 60% winners on your trading system, you've got a fantastic system, and the rest you control with risk and reward. But I would say this trading system has an accuracy above that, and I'm going to demonstrate to you why. Right, here we go, the first of the month, or thereabouts. Well, it's actually about the 5th of the month. And I'm going to show you another entry setup here. On this particular day, we've got a really nice smooth trend line. And when you're drawing trend lines, the idea is to touch as many points as possible, and sometimes in doing so, in order to get a decent trend line, you can cut off the wicks of some of the candles. So in this case, there's the start. You can see we've touched all of these candles beautifully. There's about 5 or 6 or even 10 touches on the trend line all the way up here. There's just one there that pierces through and then rallies up. You can ignore that little wick there, that's not a problem. And there's another candle that just about touches the line, and then we get this massive breakdown. Now, do we have a valid entry condition? Well, we're overbought on the stochastic at this point here. All right, we've got the top Bollinger Bands very close together over here. In other words, they're almost touching each other, and that's one of the conditions which emphasizes or increases the probability of a successful trade. And I'm going to write this down because it's pretty important. And this is called Bollinger Band confluence. Okay, I'm going to respell that, confluence. Right, what does confluence mean? Well, it means that the Bollinger Bands, the 2 Bollinger Bands, are very close together, like there and there and there. And when you have confluence, in other words, the Bollinger Bands are almost touching, it increases the strength of the signal considerably. Okay, so there was a not quite a perfect setup, but remember I said earlier, if the setup isn't perfect, it doesn't always matter. This was a massive move, incredible move, and well, I mean, that brought about 139 to 1. That's about 250 pip move. That's pretty rare, but you can see there was never any reason to exit the trade. I'll be talking about that, how to exit the trades as well. I'm just going to remove that line, and I want to point out one more point to you, and that is a trend line that moves at such a steep angle, like this one, such a rapid pace, that it's almost straight down. Now, I haven't drawn that perfectly. A trend line that moves so fast and so steeply is completely invalid. I completely ignore that. I'm looking for trend lines at about 45 degrees, and you'll grow in experience with this. This is way too steep. I'm looking for a trend line more at the sort of 45-degree angle like we get after this first sideways move. So very, very steep trend lines where the price moves down a few hundred pips or 100 pips or 50 pips in almost no time at all are to be disregarded. And you can see that this longer term trend line, in other words the shallower one, or the one that's not at the same gradient, actually works out nicely. So we've got 1, 2, 3 touches there, and actually we get a little move up after that. And you can see that oversold stochastic through the Bollinger Bands. There's no confidence because the Bollinger Bands are quite far apart, but we get a little move up from that. That looks like a tiny move up, but in fact it's because it's compared to this big move. We get one that actually goes about, well, that's a 50 pip move from there to there. Now these market moves are at the moment where the market can move 100 pips in 5 minutes or 500 pips in a day are extremely unusual if you look back over time. So there's a little bit of an issue with volatility right now, but that's the beauty of the system. It can cope with it. Right, let's look for some more setups. Here's the Asian session. There's another setup, oversold stochastic, touching the Bollinger Band quite beautifully. And do we have a 3-hour trend line? Let's have a look. It's certainly a smooth trend line, or a neat trend line. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 touches just moving down beautifully. Oversold stochastic. The top of this trend line really is at about 1715 to about, well, you could say 1700, because that's really the top, although we have this dip first. So that's about 3 hours, and then we get this nice move up. So a valid entry signal there. Here's another trend line. I'm now simply looking for stochastics and Bollinger Bands. There we touch the top Bollinger Band, overbought stochastic. Can we draw a trend line? That's the question. A smooth trend line. Yeah, I guess you could say so. It's not perfect, but it's there. The big clue to this one is this huge dark cloud cover pattern. Look at that. That is beautiful. And once again, candlesticks are very useful here in helping determine whether this trade's going to be powerful or not, especially when you get a big spike high or dark cloud cover candlestick, big spike high in this case, through the top Bollinger Band and back down underneath it, down towards the trend line, and then just breaking beneath it. This trend line is actually not quite right. And then we get this gap and move down. So another beautiful setup. Now have a look at this, and I just want to talk about this again and just put some notes on the screen here for you. And I'm going to go through all the tactics, including the advanced variations of the system, because I need to point them out to you right now. I'm not, this is not necessarily a valid signal because the trend line is not smooth, but I want to point out one thing, and I've got to move this thingy away in order to do that. And let's see if we can get the screen draw thing away. There we go. Alright, I want to point out one thing here. And these are all clues to this trading system. Now, you might think that this trading system is rather subjective, but it's not. There are very clear entry conditions, and what I'm pointing out to you right now is the entry conditions, plus as you grow more experienced with this trading system, there are so many different clues which can increase your winning rate considerably. And I'm probably going to have to go through some of these in videos later on down the line, after we've done perhaps some of the webinars, to find out what people really need to know, and perhaps some of the things they don't understand. But look at this. We've got the move up. There's the trend line. It's not great, but what I want to illustrate something else. First of all, we touch the top Bollinger Band over here. The stochastic is overbought. All right, this trend line at this stage is not long enough. We go it's from there to there is only a short period of time in that space there. It's about an hour or so. So we're waiting for a longer process of a passage of time. But we then move higher in the price and we get this beautiful spike high candle right there. And once again, I do suggest you get hold of some candlestick books, because these can really help increase your win rate, although it's not absolutely necessary. We get this beautiful spike high, but look at the stochastic. We've got a higher high on the charts. In other words, the price has moved up there, but we've got a lower high on the stochastic. The stochastics actually moved down before we get this breakdown in the candle. Now, quite simply, that's called stochastic. Let's see if I can get it. I'm just going to abbreviate this. It's a stochastic divergence. And this is often a very useful tool to use. And incidentally, when we're looking for trade system entries, we're looking for the two things to happen at the same time: overbought stochastic touching the Bollinger Band. But it often happens on the second attempt. We get a higher high, a very clear reversal spiking through the Bollinger Band, etc., but a lower high on the stochastic. So in other words, we're getting lower highs there, we're getting higher highs here. That's called divergence, because this one, the price is going one way, stochastic is going the other way, and the stochastic divergence can be used as a very useful tool. So I just wanted to point that out to you right there, because we will be mentioning these issues during live trading and during webinars, and perhaps some of the more advanced videos that I send on later on. Don't get too concerned about it right now, and if you don't understand divergence, you can just stick to the classic signals. It's not an issue. Alright, so let's get rid of that line. We're just basically looking for setups right now. Okay, oversold, but we haven't hit the Bollinger Band. So let's continue. Oversold there, we've gone through the Bollinger Band. And do we have a valid time period on this? Well, we've gone from 6 o'clock to 7:30, so no, not valid. Again, we're oversold here. We're through the two Bollinger Bands, and we're now moving down through the Bollinger Bands, just tagging down with them what happens in a strong trend. But we've got a trend line of sorts that we could draw in right there. Two reasons why that's not a valid trend line. See if you can work it out for yourself. Alright, first of all, it's way too steep. Okay, remember I said if you get these almost vertical trend lines like that, they're invalid. We're looking for more at this sort of 45-degree angle. Right, there's another vertical one there. And if you want to see if they're kind of vertical, you can just compress your charts a little bit and try and get the feeling of the angle. That's way too steep. That's good enough. I'm not saying this is a valid trend line, but that's the sort of angle you want to be looking at. And then you get this one, which is way too steep. So that's why it's not valid. That's the first reason. The second reason is because it's too short. Okay, we've gone from 9:30 or so to 10:30. That's only about an hour long. So we then continue to move along through the day. And lo and behold, we get a rather, I'm going to remove that one, we get a rather beautiful trend line coming down here, and that is the sort of angle you want, and the time frame, the time period you want. Let's have a look. We've gone from 9 a.m. to 15. That's a 6-hour trend line. We've got just going to put the screen draw back on here. We've got excuse me, 1 touch, 2 touch, 3 touch, 4 touch, 5 touch, and another little trick is 5 touches. 5 touches. Often the 5th touch breaks. So we need at least 3 minimum, but often on the 5th one, once you get beyond 3, we get a nice break. So we've got the 5 touches. We've really got a beautiful trend line at about 45 degrees. We've got the Bollinger Bands running down here, And if I get rid of this, you can see right there the stochastic is oversold, and lo and behold, we have a valid entry signal and extremely powerful move higher. Alright, so let's continue into the next session. Overbought stochastic, touching the top Bollinger Band. We can start to put our trend lines in. This one's way too wide for now. You can see we're near breaking it. We can draw a sharper trend line. Again, it's probably just too steep, and also only it's 1800 to 1930. It's only an hour and a half long, so we can disregard that one. And it's really just a process of having a look at there's that longer term trend line. Now you can see I've just been waiting the whole session for it to come down to that trend line. I'm going to see if I can draw any other ones, any steeper ones, and the answer is yes, I can. Alright, this is a slightly steeper trend line, and we've moved from 1800 to 22. That's 4 hours long at least. We've got a couple of touches, 3, 4, and then this breakdown. Didn't go above the previous high, but we were talking about stop losses, and then we moved down to the longer term trend line, which is obviously the danger area because we could get a bounce from there. Let's see what happens. But a valid entry signal, touching the top Bollinger Band. Again, we have some stochastic divergence. The first time it goes through the Bollinger Band, the stochastic's overbought. The second time it goes through the Bollinger Band, the stochastic's lower, but the price has moved higher. So again, you can see we've got the stochastic divergence right here. So price is moving higher, stochastic is moving lower, and so we've got some more divergence there. So let's just see what happens over here, because this is also an interesting part of the system. And as we move along, you can see that this longer term trend line also has a break, pretty similar to what we saw today actually. So we had a valid entry signal here, right there, as we broke beneath, and then this was confirmed as we broke beneath that trend line. Okay, so let's get rid of those lines. Alright, so what else have we got here? Well, we're going to the next session. We've got another trend line going up. That's quite nice and smooth. Alright. If there's any doubt, rather draw the wider trend line. Don't try and cut off the wicks. Don't try and force one to be higher. If there's any doubt and it doesn't look quite, you're not too sure about it, rather than drawing it like that. Obviously that's not valid because we've really cut off the wicks and the bodies of these candles here. So we can draw it wider like that. We have an entry condition because the stochastic is overbought. We're just about touching the top Bollinger Band, but is the trend line long enough? 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, yes it is. That's 3 hours long, and lo and behold we get a break beneath and a move lower before we get a move higher, of course, but that happens a bit later on after we've taken some profit on the trade. Okay, more entry conditions, but later on in the session. Do we have a valid trend line? Well, I'm going to draw the trend line in. We've got 1, 2, 3 touches, and overbought stochastic, we're through the Bollinger Band. We've got a Bollinger Band confluence there, which is really nice. Let me just point that out quickly for you. So there's the Bollinger Band confluence, and that's a pretty neat thing to see. And we do have a valid entry signal there. Whether this signal works out or not, I have no idea. And well, you can see we go into a bit of profit before moving higher. So we've got another valid signal here. We can continue to draw that trend line as we go wider. Up towards where the stochastic is overbought. So that's where the trend line gets redrawn to. And again, we have an entry signal, and we move into profit. And then it becomes quite messy. So I hope you're gathering what I'm trying to say here. We're looking for the conditions. We need a trend line which is 3 hours or longer. It needs to be smooth. It needs to have 3 touches. We need to have the stochastic overbought or oversold. In other words, overbought is above 80, oversold is below 20. And you can see the levels on the charts there. I've actually got them. Let me just point them out to you quickly. So that's the 80 level there, that's the 20 level there. So as soon as we get above there, that's overbought, and as soon as we get below the 20 level, that's oversold. Okay, so just in case I hadn't highlighted that clearly enough. So what I'm trying to do really here is highlight valid signals. There's another one. The best way to do this is by example. There's a really nice smooth trend line, but is it long enough? And ideally as well, we want to move from one Bollinger Band down towards the other. So ideally, the trend line will start at one Bollinger Band, move down to the other one, and that's when we get the signal forming. So let's see, we 1830 to 22, so that is 3 hours long. Just about touched the low Bollinger Band, oversold stochastic, and again we move up towards a profitable level. And there's another trend line. I think that's probably not long enough. You can be quite accurate when drawing these trend lines. You don't have to you can draw them kind of roughly if you want, but accuracy is better. You can see that trend line is the same sort of angle as that one. Again, we've got a nice confluence of the two Bollinger Bands just starting to form here. Oversold stochastic. We've got a trend line which is 1230 to, well, just about 2.5, maybe 3 hours long, and we get a beautiful move up. Alright, so, and then again, let's just have a look at one more. And you can see that's not really smooth, but it did work out, but I wouldn't have considered that a relevant trend line. And there's some other conditions we've also got to apply when it comes to entering the trade. I'm just showing you the trade setups for now, but there are one or two other conditions which need to be in place before you can enter the trade, and that comes down to money management. So let's go through to today. So today we saw that we had a good entry signal, or good setup on that wider trend line, which eventually proved to work out, and we had a setup on the shorter trend line. The shorter one though wasn't valid because we started at 3:30, we ended up at 5:30, only 2 hours long. But this longer one was definitely valid, and at least there was more than well over 3 hours. But that again wasn't a smooth trend line, so probably a bit iffy, that trade. Okay, so that's the setup conditions, and I'm just going to repeat it one more time, and then pause this video, and then I'm going to go into more detail about how this gets put together. So setup, I'm not talking about taking the actual trade. We need a valid trend line, and remember the three conditions of a valid trend line. We need overbought or oversold stochastic, and number three, we need Bollinger Band touch, and ideally both. And when I say touch, it could just touch or go through, right through. And one more caveat to that, I want to say look out for confluence on the Bollinger Bands, and on the stochastics look out for divergence. Right, I'm gonna actually pause this section. I'm not sure how long I've been speaking for, and compile it, and then continue on once I've done that.